In the 1890s, chronic pain was rampant in America. Opioids, which had previously been taboo, were suddenly being prescribed by doctors. A supposedly safer opioid had been developed which, as a physician wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine, was not a hypnotic and carried no danger of acquiring the habit. This movement created a monster, addicting millions of Americans to opioids. Global overproduction fueled even more demand, and as authorities clamped down, many of those addicted to these medicines turned to more potent ones, making an overdose only a minor miscalculation away. Does this story sound familiar? Well, it played itself out again in the 1990s, 100 years later. The 1890s and 1990s were both characterized by unopposed acceptance of the benefits of opioids. The transformation of physicians into opioid cheerleaders, and China played a central role first as a global consumer of opium and later as a manufacturer of incredibly dangerous fentanyl. In the 1890s, the compound marketed by Bayer to supposedly treat morphine addiction was heroin. In the 1990s, the drug made by Purdue Pharmaceuticals and marketed as a painkiller with low potential for abuse and addiction was named OxyContin. The current opioid epidemic is a huge tragedy, albeit one that could have been recognized if we could have learned from the epidemic of the past. The passage of a century works well at dulling our national memory. The pharmaceutical industry has been singled out for garnering the blame, and there's little doubt concerning the burden of responsibility the pharmaceutical industry must shoulder. There seems to be a group that largely escaped accountability. This includes physicians and the regulators who failed to protect the public. Americans constitute 5% of the world's population, but use an estimated 30% of the world's prescription opioids. This disproportionate use of prescription drugs in the United States is not an accident, but arises from a culture deliberately crafted by the pharmaceutical industry. The United States and New Zealand are the only countries that let drug makers directly advertise their claims to consumers. Their sales pitches have met with unprecedented success. This sustained pharmaceutical marketing effort means that when the average American takes a pill for pain or depression, he or she may be ingesting medications whose claims and safety have not been critically enough determined. At the end of the 19th century, when heroin was first marketed, it could be acquired only with a prescription from a physician. Many doctors of this time period highly praised opioids like heroin. A doctor wrote in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1915, "I am convinced that if we were to select, say, half a dozen of the most important drugs in the pharmacopoeia, we shall all place opium in the first rank." Decades later, in 1980, a 5-sentence letter in the New England Journal of Medicine concluded, incorrectly, that the development of opioid addiction is rare in medical patients with no history of addiction. That letter would be cited hundreds of times to make more false claims about opioids. While the senior physician who wrote the letter now regrets doing so, the damage had been done. Every prescription opioid that killed an American had a physician's sign-off on it. That's why it is essential for the medical community to examine itself to see how it contributed to this tragedy and how such an occurrence can be dealt with before approaching epidemic proportions. We have created an award-winning film titled Pleasure Unwoven that chronicles the experiences of Dr. Kevin McCulley's personal use of opioids. What he learned and now shares with others is firmly based on scientific research and personal experience. If you have not seen this acclaimed film, you really owe it to yourself to view this entertaining and authoritative journey into the world of addiction. You can find a link to the film in the description. This film has helped thousands of people and certainly is worth watching.